Welcome into Training Camp Report presented by Advent Health. Casey Phillips here with senior writer and editor Scott Smith. This is our final one because training camp is over and done with at this point.
Right.
But, you know, the whole point of training camp and all of it is to get your final roster. And we are at that moment. We're going to put a bow on this whole preseason here talking about the final 53-man roster. For you, as you look at this group and who made it after a lot of really interesting battles, what stands out to you?
There's a couple things. First of all, this is a really young team. And this is a development that's happened in just a couple of years. Remember, the Tom Brady teams were one of the older teams in the league, but they've hit on a lot of draft picks. They've re-signed some young players. They've hit on undrafted free agents. And so now you have a 53-man roster in which 40 of those guys are 26 or younger. And only 3 are over 30, and that's obviously some important players in Mike Evans, Levante David, and Will Golston. But that's a young roster, and generally speaking, you probably expect to get fewer injuries from younger players. Anybody can get hurt, but it's probably at a higher rate for older players, right, who've had more wear and tear. So that's a good thing. And also, it's a very homegrown team. Amazingly, 44 of the 53 players on this team right now were either drafted by Jason Light or signed as undrafted free agents right after the draft by Jason and his crew. So obviously, huge kudos to those people for the job they've done in recent years. And also, 20 of the 22 expected starters were either drafted or signed as undrafted free agents by the Buccaneers.
It's incredible.
We're counting Jordan Whitehead in there. He did leave, but we did draft him. Jason Light did.
Yes.
So that's really interesting. And then also, there's a split, at least at the beginning of the season. Remember, there never really is a final roster. It'll get tweaked here and there, and things will happen. But there's a pretty heavy split towards defense. So as Coach Bowles was saying earlier today, some of the decisions down to the wire were what he called cross-position decisions.
Yes.
Like, you wanted to keep a 6th outside linebacker because it's hard to get edge rushers in this league, and it came down to that over a 6th receiver. And you hope to get some of those receivers through to the practice squad so you can still have them around and bring them up when you need them. But 27 players on offense and on defense and 23 on offense. So it was the defensive positions like DB that got 11 that got extra guys.
Interesting. All right, well, let's go position by position now and tell you who made it and our thoughts on that. So first of all, again, in terms of how many you kept, quarterback was one that we had been wondering that this team has kept 3 a lot of different times, but this year only chose to keep 2, Baker and Kyle Trask. What are your thoughts on the fact they only kept those 2?
Yeah, now I want to point out, while this one is in order as it would be on the depth chart, all of these are going to be in alphabetical order, so don't read into anything in the order.
Right.
This one you can, because Baker's definitely the starter. I just think they tried to do this last year until somebody tried to take John Wolford away. They prefer to keep a spot for another position and just carry 2. They have a lot of confidence in Kyle Trask, and I'm certain they'll try to get John Wolford back on the practice squad.
Absolutely. All right, let's talk about running backs. So this one is interesting, especially because of the IR situation. So we should mention Chase Edmonds going to be starting the year on that. But looking at that, we kept these 3 guys. And what are your thoughts here?
Actually, Chase Edmonds was put on the type of IR that he can't come back from. So it's just these 3. We usually keep 4. So this is light. Again, another position that gave up a spot for some other one. But, you got to factor in things like special teams and so on. But it probably is plenty, because last year, Rashad White pretty much handled the whole thing by himself. And so even if you give a lot more of that to Bucky Irving, you still also have Sean Tucker, who looked great in the preseason. So I think you've got plenty of running backs right there.
All right, so next up, wide receiver. This was definitely one we watched a lot during camp and talked about how many it was going to be and who was going to grab. After Mike and Chris, some of those next few spots were very up for grabs. You mentioned that this is a spot that sort of got taken away because of either special teams or some other positions. But what do you see in terms of these 5 guys and why this group they feel confident in?
Well, I think we all felt throughout most of camp that Mike and Chris and Jalen McMillan and Trey Palmer were pretty much locks. And then it became clear from all the stories and people talking about it that Cam Johnson was going to make this team. That's the first player ever to make an NFL roster out of Barton College, which I had never heard of before Cameron Johnson. It's in North Carolina, I think. And then I was pretty sure they would have a 6th receiver, and it would be between Rakim Jarrett, Cody Thompson, and Brian Miller, who all look good in the preseason. Well, Rakim Jarrett ended up on IR. He can come back after a minimum of 4 games. I think what they thought in the end was it's just really close. So we're not going to choose between them. Hopefully we can get them back on the practice squad, and then we can elevate them when we need them.
Now, next up, tight ends. This was another group we were wondering how many there would be, particularly because of Liam Cohen's offense. And we've heard rumblings that he will be using 2 tight ends less, that it might be more. So I think this speaks really highly to what they think of these guys by keeping all 4.
Yeah, I think Caden Payne, we all knew were going to make it. So does Keefe make it, and does the 7th-round rookie make it? And they kept all of them in part because Keefe is very good on special teams, and he can also play fullback, and he's a great blocker. And Devin Culp is just a really dynamic athlete out in the open. I think they think he could develop into a guy that gives you big plays.
Right.
So yeah, it's a little strange. You maybe wouldn't have thought this was the position the Bucs would go deep on offense because of Liam Cohen's background, and the Rams never use 2 tight end sets. But I think he's put his own tweaks on this roster. We saw plenty of 2 tight end plays during training camp, and Coach Bowles said today that they will be using 2 tight end packages and that they have packages for all 4 of those guys.
All right, so now offensive linemen, there are 9 of them. Break down for me a little bit of what we think in terms of the starters and how the backups have shaken out and who's going to be backing up who here.
Right. Now, 9 is the standard number here, and you keep 8 of them active on game day. Obviously, from left to right, you're starting Tristan Wirfs and Ben Bredesen. Graham Barton, the rookie first-rounder, won the center job. Right guard Cody Malko, I think that's what we're looking at right here, right?
Yeah.
And right tackle Luke Gedeke. So that leaves Justin School probably as your swing tackle. Elijah Klein, the 6th-round rookie, has shown that he can play guard or tackle. And Robert Hainsey is a backup as well that can play a number of different positions.
Yep. All right, next up, defensive linemen. This one had a interesting couple guys fighting for that last spot as well. They kept 6 of them. Tell us your thoughts here.
Yeah, so the first 5, actually the bottom 5 listed there were the ones that everybody assumed would make the team. And so it was guys like Ernest Brown, who's from Northwestern University, and C.J. Brewer, and a couple others that are in there. And it looks like Ernest Brown was the one who did the most to win it.
Yep, that's going to be an interesting group to watch for sure. You talked about one of those 30-plus-year-olds in Will. I just love that he keeps coming back. 12th season.
I know.
Love that for him.
Awesome.
All right, outside linebacker, another group that's been interesting to watch because there were a few guys that were really battling for those last 2 spots, and you mentioned that this was a position group that kind of stole from some others.
And basically, you're bringing back last year's group, except Shaq Barrett is gone, and you replace him with Chris Braswell, and I guess Cam Gill is gone, and Jose Ramirez gets that spot. Jose Ramirez spent his rookie season on the practice squad, but the coaches all say he made so much improvement, and so did Marquise Watts by practicing against our starters all year. He had 3 sacks in the preseason. He's looked really good, and so he takes the leap in his second year to the active roster.
All right, so inside linebacker now, this is another one where we knew the starters, and we were just wondering about those next few spots. What did you see about who they decided to keep here?
Yeah, they stayed with Servassier. He has been injured a lot, but he was practicing today, so that's a good sign. We've seen J.J. Russell get a little starting experience, and it's gone pretty well. So I think those 4 were pretty much clear, and then they just, rather than, and Kalen DeLoach, I think, is nursing an injury, the rookie that they like, and I think rather than choosing between like Kalen DeLoach and Antonio Greer and Vi Jones, they're going to try to get those guys on the practice squad.
All right, so then next up we have our cornerbacks. This was another group that we knew the starters, and then there were a few different guys battling for the backup spots, and I feel like, we always talk about every camp, there's always some undrafted guys that make a name for themselves, and Tyree Funderburk was definitely one of those guys.
Yeah, and it's great for him because he missed the last couple of weeks with an ankle injury, so that shows you how much he'd already shown by then, right? And when you see this one in the next screen, you're going to see 11 total defensive backs. We don't get too hung up on whether they're called corners or safeties, so if 5 seems a little light to you, just remember that the guys battling for the slot corner job are basically considered safeties, and Christian Izzian and Tyke Smith and Tavier Thomas. So Zion obviously steps up in Carlton Davis's place as the full-time starter, and I think Bryce Hall would be the first guy in if anything happened to him or Dean.
Okay, so now, since you brought it up, let's go to those safeties and talk about how, like you said, several guys on here that could have been on the other screen. Kind of depends on what they're being asked to do, but definitely a position that we, again, knew the starters and got some new faces with a draft pick and a free agent signing and some other guys on the backups there. And
yeah,
for the nickel spot.
I'm wondering how many of these guys are going to try to get on the field at some point or another, because obviously you don't really want to take Antoine and Jordan off the field. And by the way, Jordan returned to practice today,
so
that's a good
goodness.
sign. And then, whoever doesn't win this slot, which is probably down to Tyke and Christian at this point, how do they use them? Because they like both those players, and they really like Kayvon Merriweather a lot too, especially playing around in the box and near the line of scrimmage. So that's a lot of guys. I think
maybe a dime package in addition. I mean, not just nickel, but maybe throwing some dime out there.
So I think all those guys have a shot at getting some action during the season.
All right, and then we'll close with this. Of course, we always have to do the special.
Can't forget the kickers. You need them.
Can't forget them. Last but not least, your specialists. So these are your three guys, and definitely I think for some people this was a more surprising one of the more familiar names and veteran players, and Zach Trinner was released in favor of Evan Deckers as the long snapper. So going a little bit, again, younger. That was part of the younger roster there as well. But Camarda and McLaughlin coming back.
Yeah, those two came back. No big surprise. The Bucs did bring in punter Nolan Cooney for a little while to have another leg. And I think Coach Bowles has expressed his dissatisfaction with the way it's been going lately for Jake, but we've seen enough of him just killing the ball that we know it's going to come back,
yes.
right? Hopefully right away. And then, like you said, Evan Deckers, this is the second time he tried to unseat Trinner. He was an undrafted rookie out of Duke last year. This time he did it, but if you saw the social media posts from Zach, you can understand that he's very thankful for the time he had in the NFL. It wasn't an easy path for him to the NFL. You know, he tried a long time to get in, finally got it with the Bucs and held on to it for 5 years, which is a pretty good run for a long snapper. And you could tell he was very appreciative for everything that his career so far. Maybe he'll sign with somebody else, but everything he did with the Buccaneers, so that was good to see. But now a new chapter, and Evan Deckers gets a shot.
All right, well, that is going to do it for us on this final training camp report presented by Advent Health. Thanks for hanging out with us all preseason, and we'll see you next time.